This is the Deps Cover Scat. Oh my gosh. It looks like a You were thinking it, I'm just saying it. This is a very interesting hunk of plastic that, could it replace the Senko? Some people think yes. You guys know that I love my Japanese fishing videos. And I finally got my hands on some of these baits, and today we're gonna take it out to the testing facility and just see what this bait is all about. The Cover Scat comes in a 2.5 inch, a 3.5 inch, and a 4 inch. The interesting thing about this bait is it is completely loaded with salt. Now, besides the fact that it seems like every Japanese angler has been talking about this bait for the last couple of years, I wanted to get my hands on this bait because it actually reminded me of a Senko. Both the Yamamoto Senko and the Cover Scat are actually meant to be fished weightless, and both of them really do not have a ton of action to them, and there are a lot of times where bass just do not want a lot of action. We all know how effective the Senko is. Now, this is the proper way that the Scout is supposed to be hooked up, with an EWG hook. As you can see, there's actually a little bump on the top of the bait where you're actually supposed to kind of texpose your hook. Now, I actually didn't have any EWG hooks that were big enough to fit some of the bigger sizes. This is a 6/0 trocar hook. As you can see, I'm actually coming out of the bump on top, but that's the way I'm gonna rig the 4-inch size bait. And then I have the 3.5 inch size on a 5/0 owner twist lock hook. This is my favorite frog hook. To me, I really like a twist lock hook like this because you tend to go through a lot less plastic with your frog baits, so I can imagine you're going to go through a lot less Cover Scats with this hook as well. Oh wow, look at that. I'm actually just sitting here about to jump up on the front deck and fish these baits, but I just made a cast out and I actually realized, geez. Well, anyways, I actually just realized that you can twitch this bait across the surface and it walks back and forth like a walking bait. I bet this sucker skips. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it skips. I mean, like a rocket. This video is brought to you by sportsmansoutfitters.com. Right now at Sportsman's Outfitters, you can actually pick up the exact combos that I like to use, which include the Bruin ELS reel in the Arc Tharp series or Invoca Pro series rod, and you can get them at a pretty big discount. All you gotta do is add the rod and the reel to your cart, and you will see that discount at checkout. Now, this thing is supposed to be fished weightless, but you can fish it on bait casting rod and reel equipment because this sucker is super heavy. I mean, as you can see, I can just skip it under anything because of the weight that it has. Now, I have the 3.5 inch and the 4 inch on the exact same rod, which is the Arc Tharp series Moneymaker rod. This is a 7-foot 3-inch medium heavy power rod. I've got the 3.5 inch on straight braided line because I thought I could fish it like a frog, but I have the bigger one, the 4 inch on straight fluorocarbon because I'm gonna drag that one across the bottom, kind of like a jig or a Texas rig. Now, this bait was intended to fish across the bottom, but you could really use it kind of like a frog replacement. I mean, you can cast this thing, skip it underneath overhanging trees. I mean, it does sink, but as you can see, you can work it kind of just across the water. And I think if you were fishing matted vegetation, you could actually cast this thing on top of that mat and drag it across the mat. Golly, that thing skips. Oh, that's a bass. There's the first Cover Scat bass. Oh yeah, woo! There she blows. We got the first Cover Scat bass, just a small little fish right there. One thing I did notice though is that I ripped my hook out of the Cover Scat. So, you know, this might be because I have the wrong size hook. You know, like I said, from what I'm seeing, a lot of guys put a pretty big EWG size hook in this, you know, 6/0 or bigger. And I got this 5/0 one, but that's not ideal. I don't like plastics that rip so easily. Even though they tend to get more bites because of how soft they are, I still don't necessarily love going through baits constantly. Now, I've been working that one kind of like a frog, but the way that this bait was actually intended to be fished is you actually kind of cast it out, for instance, maybe on a rock pile, and you're actually just gonna let this bait sink all the way to the bottom. And then what I see a lot of guys do over in Japan is kind of a twitch, pause retrieve. So after it's done and sank all the way to the bottom, looks like it's there, you're gonna actually just kind of twitch, and let it sit. And what a lot of times it looks like on the bottom is actually a crawfish. As I'm twitching it like this, is that a bass? No, that's grass. As I'm twitching across the bottom, that thing just kind of scoots up and darts all over the place. And if you've ever seen a crawfish on the bottom, if you get close to it, you know, if you've ever been in a creek or something, they'll just scurry off real quick. And sometimes they can dart all kinds of different ways. And that's exactly what this bait looks like. Now, one of my favorite baits to kind of fish deeper across structure is just a football jig, you know, and the reason that you would want to throw the cover scat over a football jig is because the cover scat, kind of as the name implies, really comes through cover very, very well. And because it's weightless, if you're fishing real jaggedy rock piles or house foundations or something like that, this bait is gonna glide over that rock and those foundations, where a lot of times a football jig, I mean, unless you're using a light football jig, you're gonna get hung up a lot of times in that stuff. So that's just kind of a reason why I might use the cover scat over a bait like a football jig. Ooh, that's a bass. Oh, okay. Okay, I really thought that that was gonna be a giant. If you guys noticed there, I really set the hook pretty hard, and that's because I'm really using a smaller hook than I should be with this bait. When a fish picks up that bait, there's a lot of plastic right here, so that hook has got to be out. That's kind of why I set the hook so hard, because I really want to make sure that I got through the plastic and into that bass. Now, in case you wanted to know, this is that same rod I was using with straight braid, but this is 15-pound fluorocarbon, which is kind of what I use a lot for just like offshore techniques like football jigs and big worms. You know, although I like that 3.5 and 4-inch size, I was actually kind of drawn first to this little 2.5 incher. As you can see, this is just a cute little bait right here. And the reason that I was drawn to it is that, you know, a lot of times in later summer, you have bass that are eating really small bait fish and small shad. And mimicking those bait fish can be tricky at times. But this little guy, I mean, it looks just like a small shad. And the best thing about it is, say for instance, you're fishing for schooling fish that are eating those baits, you can cast this thing, I mean, a long ways. And not only that, you can work it across the surface, and that fish can come up there and bite it. And then instead of having treble hooks like a topwater, you have a single hook. So that's just something that really intrigued me about this bait. I got the 2.5 inch set up on a spinning rod. I'm gonna cast this around and kind of work it across the top for a little bit. Look at that thing. That thing looks good right there. Doot, 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 doot. Then you can just kill it. Oh, he does got it. Okay, now we got a fish on a 2.5, a 3.5, and a 4. Not big ones, but you know what? It's fine. I'm actually gonna fish this bait now like I'm supposed to. I've been kind of messing around, fishing a lot like a topwater, but I know that just above me, there's a little subtle point that sticks out with a little bit of rock on it. And that's really kind of the perfect situation for this bait like this. So I'm gonna wing that bait. These suckers, I mean, they fly, just so you know. They absolutely fly. I'm gonna wing that thing across the point, let it sink, and then I'm gonna just kind of pop it, twitch it across the bottom. What the heck happened there? Do I have a fish? What is going on? Oh, I do have a fish. Gosh, he ate that. Dude, as soon as that thing hit the water, that fish was on it. I just seen my, whoa, I just saw my line scooting. Tell you what, when you're fishing this thing across the bottom, it is it's an uber slow retrieve, which is probably why it gets so many bites. You know, a lot of baits that we use across the bottom that have weight to them, like a football jig or a big worm, I mean, we drag those things fairly fast across the bottom. So having a weightless presentation down there, it's just something that's gonna look very different to a bass. And anytime you can be different, I say it all the time on this channel, anytime you can be different, you're gonna catch a different bass than other guys are catching. That is a fish. Oh, God. Okay. So I actually just kind of flipped that like I would a soft plastic Texas rig or a flipping jig right there. I just flipped it kind of into that lay down tree. And I could just tell I'm watching the line and it's just kind of gliding through that tree. I'm sure that just has a pretty unique action. Ooh. That was cool. That was cool. Not a big one, guys. Chunky fish anyways. You know, this bait to me is really, it's like a number of baits kind of put together. You know, it's kind of like a frog. It's kind of like a Texas rig. It's kind of like a jig. It's kind of like a soft jerk bait. You know, I was literally just using this bait, kind of twitching it subsurface, not on the surface, but just below. And I saw that fish kind of come up there, almost like a floating worm. All right, let's talk about the pros and cons of this bait. Now, first, the pros. You know, one thing that I really didn't know about this bait when I first picked it up is just how versatile this bait is. For instance, today I fished this bait as a topwater bait. I also fished it as a jig or a Texas rig. I also fished it as a soft jerk bait or a floating worm. There's just a lot that you can do with this one bait. So to me, if you are an angler who doesn't have a ton of tackle or doesn't carry a ton of tackle, maybe you're a bank fisherman and you want just one bait to kind of be able to do a lot with, this is a great option because you can do a lot with it. Now, as far as the sizes go, I probably like the 3.5 inch size the most. The 4 inch, it's just a little bit big. There's definitely situations where you can catch fish on it. The 2.5 inch, I do like that bait a lot, and I'm going to use that a lot for those schooling fish like I talked about earlier, but an all-around good bait is that 3.5 inch size. Now, the second big pro to this lure is that it comes through cover really, really well, which is probably why it's called the Cover Scat, because it comes through cover really well, whether that's wood or rock or grass. I was really able to bring this through everything. And something that I kind of talked about earlier is that if you fish a lot of rock piles, say an 8-10 foot of water, and you're getting hung up a lot on things like Ned rigs or football jigs or Texas rigs, that's where a Cover Scat can really play because it's going to come through that rock very, very well. So now let's talk about a few cons of this bait. Now, the one con that I realized actually when I bought the bait is that they are a little bit pricey when it comes to a soft plastic. You know, I think that they're around $9 or $10, and I actually don't even know how many came in this package. I want to say somewhere between 6 and 8. So, I mean, you're talking about $1 or so a piece, maybe even a little bit more for each plastic, which is just a little bit expensive. You know, a Senko is another really expensive bait though as well that a lot of us buy because they work so well. You know, a Senko, a lot of times you're talking about 75 cents for each particular bait that it comes with. The Cover Scat, in my mind, is very similar. It's an expensive bait, but it might be worth it because of the fish that it catches. Now, with that being said, the plastic on this bait is what I'm going to call bipolar. Some baits I caught 1 fish on, some baits I caught 6 or 7. And to be honest, that happens a lot with a lot of different soft plastics, but a lot of soft plastics don't always cost $10 per pack. Now, all in all, I actually really like this bait. I'm definitely gonna have some on me, and I definitely see situations where having a weightless presentation, especially if you can fish it a little bit deeper, is going to get you a lot of bites. Now, another Japanese lure that I absolutely love is the Jackal bounty fish. And I'm gonna leave a link for a video, a review, kind of like this one that I did all about the bounty fish right here. So if you enjoyed this video, I think you're gonna like this one as well. Please don't forget to subscribe, comment below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.